In today's video, I will reveal Markobi's card trick that made him a FISM winner at the World Championship of Magic. As a bonus, I will also explain his Penn and Teller's Fool Us performance. The card trick he performed on Fool Us is a condensed version of his FISM act, so I will start by recapping his FISM performance. Phase 1, finding the signed queen with 2 jokers. Markobi spreads the deck face up, and as he deals clumps of cards on the table, he asks the volunteer to call out stop.
Can you just say stop to any place, please? Stop, yes.
And hands over the queen of clubs, which is the card they stopped at for it to be signed. To ensure the signature is large and visible, Markobi immediately scribbles all over it. The second volunteer is requested to place the card anywhere face up inside the deck, after which he dribbles the cards to catch the jokers, which he will use to find the signed queen. Unfortunately, one of the jokers is missing, but with a quick move, he turns the 5 of hearts into the second joker. After displaying both jokers, he tosses them into the deck as he dribbles the cards, then spreads it out to show the signed queen sandwiched in between the jokers. Here is the explanation. Well, the queen of clubs Markobi apparently had the spectator freely select as he dealt the cards was not a free selection. This is because when you listen carefully to the volunteer calling out stop,
can you just say stop to any place, please? Stop, yes, if you...
He completely ignores her and deals an entire extra packet above the pinky break he was holding, marking the position of the queen in the deck. A quick rewind to the beginning shows Markobi purposefully spreading the cards, looking for the queen of clubs, catching a pinky break here which he used to force the queen. But it doesn't make sense to force the queen, only to have it signed by the spectator, thereby making the card unique and difficult to replicate, so any possible queen of clubs duplicates in the deck would be rendered useless. Even though she signed the card, we never saw what it even looked like. He scribbled all over it with the excuse of it not being large and visible, thereby making it impossible to identify later on in the performance. Yes, you may have caught on. Markobi is using duplicates in his act, which is why in his Fool Us performance we spot 2 different signed cards. He scribbles in a way to both hide the original signature and at the same time replicate the signature as best as he could of his pre-prepared duplicates already inside the deck. When he attempts to lose the signed queen in the face-up deck, we notice his fingers curling up underneath the spread and can be seen repositioning the card at the very bottom. This particular card control he did works by pulling the card with your middle and ring finger, then pushing it all the way to the bottom. Since he is using duplicates during this trick, you may be wondering, why does he even need to control the original signed card? The reason is he only uses it for the first phase of his FISM act, in order to find this signed queen with the jokers. This first phase of his FISM winning act isn't even a part of his Fool Us act. Instead, he jumps into finding the royal flush after the card is signed by Burke. A quick rewind and you may recall only the top section of the face-up deck is shuffled and thrown haphazardly onto the table, whereas this bottom section is never shuffled for a very important reason. This bottom faced-up section, which is technically the top of the deck when you hold the entire deck facing down, has a 13-card packet sequence where the very bottom 3 cards consist of 1 face-down joker, followed by a face-up 5 of hearts and a second joker. Which explains why, when he picks up the bottom unshuffled section, we spot that face-down joker right here. After the queen of clubs is controlled to the very bottom of the deck, he can be seen riffling 4 cards, catching a pinky break in plain sight, then cupping the 4 cards in his right hand to do the apparent catch as he dribbles the cards. Out of the 4 cards, he's holding a single joker here, while in his right hand the remaining 3. To turn the 5 of hearts into a joker, he flipped over the packet 180 degrees before displaying the jokers in each hand, repositioned the signed queen behind 1 joker and the 5 of hearts behind the other like this, after which he tossed the joker with the 5 of hearts into the air without separating them. But how exactly? Well, the joker which was face down was attached with a light adhesive to the 5 of hearts. You may wonder why not just use a double facer instead? Why go through the hassle of using a light adhesive? Well, he had to separate the 5 of hearts from the joker, which is why he struggled here to pick up the sandwiched queen, and then detached and left the 5 of hearts in the spread. So before he even tossed the jokers into the deck, the sequence of the 4 cards was like this, with the queen in between, and since the 5 of hearts faced the opposite way, he ended up flashing it here during the flip toss. Phase 2. Finding royal flush for the clubs and the 4 queens. Markobi then loses the signed queen in the spread as he squares it up and discards the jokers behind the table. He then performs an overhand shuffle and once again, as he deals packets of cards, requests the spectator to call stop at any point, after which he flips over to show it's the signed queen he lost earlier. He places it into the spread on the table, yet it appears back on top of the deck. He repeats this trick of teleporting the signed queen from the spread back to his hand a total of 4 times, then places the signed queen aside and splits the remaining cards in his hand into 3 packets, one by one. Out of nowhere, he says, "My mom loves royal flushes," places his fingers on the cards and amazingly pulls out 4 cards to complete the royal flush for the clubs, then places the signed queen aside again and loses these 4 royal flush cards and squares the deck up. He then holds the queen in his left hand, out-jogs the 3 queens from the deck, and teleports them straight under the signed queen. Here is the explanation. You'll notice when Markobi places the original signed queen at the center of the spread and squares it up, an obvious gap is visible. This gap was actually left there on purpose to throw the judges off track. You have to understand that this act he is performing is not targeted to impress the layman, but for judges who are also magicians at the FISM competition. Which is why, throughout this routine, you'll spot him trying to do certain sleight of hand moves magicians recognize, but they end up just being red herrings. This explains why he isn't seen catching a break at that original signed queen location, and instead does an in-jog shuffle, which is a sleight of hand move used to control one section of the deck while shuffling the other. An in-jog shuffle works by cutting off the section you want to control from the top, and with the remaining cards, you perform an overhand shuffle, such that the first few cards are in-jogged like this, and the remaining cards are thrown normally, so that from the magician's perspective, he is able to see a break right above the section which he wants to make sure its sequence isn't disturbed, and as he attempts to square the deck up, catches a pinky break, which you can see Markobi doing here as his thumb reaches behind the deck, lifts the in-jog cards and his pinky squeezes in between. Now you may be wondering, why does he need to make sure one section is unmixed? You may recall, in the first phase, I mentioned a 13-card packet that was positioned at the very bottom of the faced-up deck. Out of those 13 cards, the 5 of hearts was left in the spread here. The 2 jokers were discarded, and just a moment ago we saw him lose the original signed queen here as he squared up the spread before the in-jog shuffle, leaving behind a 10-card packet sequence. Since the deck is now face down, this is how the sequence looks like, such that above this 10 of clubs playing card is where his pinky is positioned. So as he says to freely call out stop, he throws all the cards above the pinky break onto the table. These top 7 cards are going to be used in his royal flush finding routine. These right here are 2 signed queen of clubs duplicates that he had prepared before the show. He then can be seen counting 4 cards from the top and catches a pinky break, after which he performs a quadruple lift, or in simpler words, flips over all 4 cards at once. Knowing this sequence of the cards makes it a lot easier to keep track of the royal flush. If we now take note of the position of the first card, which is the 10 of clubs that he placed in the spread, then fast forward to the moment he pulls this card out and compare these moments. It's clear he placed his finger exactly on this card that he positioned at a slight angle in the mess. We can prove he used this technique to find the second card as well, which is the jack of clubs as he placed it in the spread here, and fast forward to the moment he pulls this card out of the spread and see his finger positioning. After that, he placed 3 of hearts, which he showed to us on purpose to apparently prove to the judges he isn't using signed queen of clubs duplicates to teleport the signed card, and basically admitted to switching the signed queen before placing it in the spread, at the same time created a sense of randomness in his routine. After dealing all 3 cards off the quadruple lift, there is only 1 duplicate queen he is holding face-up, which explains why he performs these false sleight of hand moves as if he was performing some sort of double lift toss or tenkai palm switch. As soon as this first signed queen is placed on the spread, he flips over the second signed duplicate in the sequence. This second signed queen is placed aside faced up, and he gets ready to position the last 2 cards, which were the king and the ace of clubs. This is done using the slip control technique, which he executed by first flipping over the deck, takes several cards from the top, then using his right hand fingers pushes a single card, slips it below the first packet and turns it over onto the table. Then performs this same exact technique to position the ace of clubs on top of the second packet, leaving behind 1 packet that he places aside, which contains the remaining 3 queens on top. At this point, we already know how he extracted the royal flush cards. What's left now is to keep track of this packet containing the 3 queens. After losing the 4 royal flush cards back into the spread, he makes sure to pinch the top packet as he gathers the cards below it. Then counts the 4 cards from the top, catches a pinky break which is clearly visible right here, pinches all 4 queens with his left fingers, and out jogs and pushes 3 random cards in the deck and reveals the queens. In his Fool Us act, he accidentally flashed the 3 kings here. Take note, this second phase of his FISM performance marks the beginning of phase 1 in his Fool Us act, 99% of it being exactly the same. So instead of using the queen, the king of clubs is forced instead. The method he used to catch a pinky break for the king of clubs was using a slip control, which you can spot him doing here, by sliding the very bottom card and repositioning it above his pinky break. After that, he has the card signed by Brooke and does the same scribble excuse, loses the signed king in the deck face up, but this time he really does lose it in the deck, since he isn't finding the original signed king with 2 jokers. Instead, he has an 11 cards packet sequence at the bottom of the deck, which looks like this. Queens are replaced with the kings, including the signed queens, and an extra 6 of hearts is inserted in between the signed kings. This 6 of hearts was used to perform a variation of the shake change. That works by simply flipping over 2 cards positioned back to back. The rest of the routine of finding the royal flush and 4 kings was done exactly the same way as his FISM performance. Phase 3. Losing and finding the 4 queens, the first version. Markobi spreads and places all 4 queens at random locations, ultimately losing them inside. Then requests one spectator to touch any card, which turns out to be the Queen of Hearts. He repeats this with the second spectator and she selects the Queen of Spades, after which he haphazardly lays out the cards on the table, hands over a pile to the volunteer asking them to deal the cards one by one, and stop at any moment. The card they freely stopped had turned out to be the 3rd queen. To find the 4th signed queen, he squares up all the cards, reaches into his pocket and shows that the entire deck had vanished from his hands into his pocket, leaving only the signed queen he was looking for. Here is the explanation. While he was showing the queens to us, he can immediately be seen counting and pushing off 4 cards from the top of the deck to catch a pinky break, which is a lot more visible here when he reaches to flip over the signed queen. After this, he places the queens on top of the deck and performs the most obvious 4-card packet switch in this routine, leaving the queens on top of the deck. This explains why he never showed those 4 random cards as he placed them into the spread. Instead of simply squaring up the deck, he picks up the top portion of the deck, catches a pinky break as he places the remaining cards on top, and asks one volunteer to touch any card.
But normally you don't say, but I say, yes. This one is a queen.
This right here was a classic force, which works like this.
So what you do is you have your card on top, the force card on top, whether it's whatever. 5 of hearts will be our force card. And what I do is I put it to the middle of the deck by cutting it, and I have my pinky break. And when I spread through, it has to be pretty quick. Like, go ahead, pick any card you want. And as soon as they start reaching their hand out, you jump to that pinky break pretty quick, and you start to move your hand closer, and you basically force their finger on that card. And there you go. It's your 5 of hearts.
The second queen was also classic forced onto the spectator, which is why during his Fool Us performance, since Penn and Teller are familiar with a classic force, he just used it as a joke and not a serious phase of his routine here.
Yeah, this is a king of, yeah, it's a king, so we will touch one card, but this is the same, so we don't, yeah.
However, for the third queen, Markobi used the 7th card psychological force technique. To prepare for this force, the target force card, which in this case was the queen, is positioned 7th from the top of the deck. But how did Markobi get the 3rd queen to the 7th position? If we rewind a bit, after he forced the 2nd queen, watch as Markobi's fingers count 6 cards one by one, using the fingers of his right hand, right above the 3rd queen, separates the 2 packets and catches a pinky break and was ready to perform the psychological force. Now, before he hands over the packet to the spectator to deal down one by one, he tosses all the cards above the pinky break onto the table. At this moment, the deck he's holding contains the following 8 cards in this sequence from top. He grabs a hold of the top chunk, places this packet aside, and makes sure to clip onto it with his left-hand fingers, then can be seen grabbing several random cards and adding them underneath this packet, and hands it over to the volunteer. Then, using psychological suggestion techniques, he gets them to stop at the 7th card, which I will explain with an example. David Blaine's performance with college students at Cambridge University is a great example to help you understand how the 7th card's psychological force works that Markobi used and what happens when it fails, since psychological card forces can never go 100% right all the time, especially when it comes to giving control over the card selection entirely up to the spectator. For context, the 2 of spades, being the card he intended to force, was positioned 7th from the top of the deck.
I want you to deal them face down one at a time onto the table slowly. Slowly feel each card and keep thinking of your card now. Good.
Notice David asking the spectator to deal slowly while feeling each card are both psychological suggestions only to make sure they don't rush through the deck. With such forces, the magicians always make sure to choose a spectator who is shy and hesitant to be a part of the trick. This is so when they are asked to deal slowly. The spectator suddenly becomes the center of attention, and with each second the pressure of the audience builds in their mind, which causes them to stop their dealing earlier in the deck as their only escape.
Good. And stop whenever you want, and then I'll give you a choice.
Notice that once the spectator had dealt 4 cards, only then he commanded her to stop at free will. The reason for having them deal 4 cards first is to give the impression that they are past the start of the deck. The slow dealing is the psychological factor once again.
This one?
Are you sure?
Yep.
You can add, subtract, you can do, if you don't, you can go further or not.
Take note the spectator stopped at the 8th card instead of the 7th card. To make sure she doesn't immediately turn over this 8th card, David asked her whether she was sure. David Blaine actually has explained this question-asking concept himself when he was teaching a trick to a group of people.
When you stop, I'm going to give you the chance to change your mind. The reason I say that is because that way he doesn't stop and turn it over.
At this point, he immediately picked up the packet, knowing that he can perform a double lift to show the top card as the 2 of spades, hoping the spectator doesn't actually add more cards to the packet.
You can go further or not. It's up to you. In other words, let me explain it to you before you make a decision. If you want to add to it, you can.
Okay, can I add 3?
He made sure to ask her how many she wanted to add to keep track of the position of the 2 of spades. By adding 3 more cards, the force card was now at the 5th position in the packet.
Mel, for the first time, do you want to change your card? Do you want to start this fresh?
No, I'll stick with it.
You're going to stay with that?
He counted 4 cards from the top, caught a pinky break here, then performed a classic pass that works by clipping the top packet above the break and pulling it below. As a result, David shifted the 4 extra cards to the bottom. So now, the 2 of spades is at the top of the deck. This method was the backup plan.
I'm going to show it to you. You can change if you're not sure. Do you want to change?
No.
In Markobi's case, he had an advantage David didn't have. Not only did he have the queen in the 7th position, but also at the 8th position since both queens were together, so he had a greater chance of nailing it.
One by one. Yes, yes, slowly. Yes, like this. Yes, yes. No, yes. Okay, do it. Yeah.
Similar to David's performance, Markobi also asks the volunteer to deal the cards one by one slowly. Then, only after 4 cards are dealt onto the table, he requests them to stop at any moment.
And when slow. And when you want, you stop. Yes.
Fortunately, they end up stopping exactly at the 7th card. You'll notice the psychological force wasn't used during his Fool Us performance. This is obviously because, first of all, Penn and Teller would never fall for it, and second, Brooke Burke, the host of the show. Picking her as your shy and hesitant of attention target would be the last thing he would do. To ensure he doesn't lose track of the 4th queen, he immediately grabs hold of the packet from the volunteer's left hand and places the remaining cards from the table under it. Then he slips the top signed queen into his right hand using his right thumb, while placing the deck into his back pocket. Phase 4, losing and finding the 4 queens, the second version. Markobi picks up the signed queen and loses it inside the deck, then one by one out jogs the remaining 3 queens and pushes them inside as well. After that does a messy shuffle and lays them out on the table, which he organizes into 3 piles, and then realizes since there are 4 queens he needs to create 4 piles, so he splits one of them, and then asks one of the volunteers to call out stop as he counts to 5 with his fingers. They stop him at the number 5, and he begins counting to the 5th card in the first 3 piles to find a queen in each of them. But with the 4th and final pile, a 7 of diamonds appears at the 5th position. He then asks the volunteer to reach out and freely pick any card they wish, which he turns over to reveal that it is in fact the signed queen. Here is the explanation. He first performed the most obvious deck switch in plain sight, which he executed by placing the first deck into his back pocket and pulls out a second deck. However, what doesn't make sense is he was already using signed duplicates in the first deck. So what's so special about this second deck? To understand this, I want to point out something suspicious. First, we spot a face-up card inside this deck he hasn't even dropped on the table yet, and as he proceeds, we then spot a second face-up card, which is the 9 of clubs, which he flipped over upon pulling it out of the deck with his thumb. During this entire apparent mess, no cards are actually seen being flipped over, other than the 9 of clubs as he lays out the cards on the table. So how come we suddenly see 2 more face-up cards here in this switch deck? If you were thinking that maybe it's done to make it look like the deck switch never took place and it's an attempt to make it look like the first messed up deck, then you're wrong. Because once again, he is performing for magicians, and this deck to pocket trick is one of the most basic trick every magician knows. The reason for this is a lot clever than you think. This switch deck is set up such that 95% of this deck consists of the signed duplicate Queen of Clubs cards. These cards he intentionally placed faced up are the remaining 5%. The reason is so, when he lays out the cards, it doesn't create suspicion about the face-down cards, and makes it look like any of those cards could be flipped over. But there is one card, which is the 7 of diamonds, that is face down and is positioned at the very bottom of this switch deck. The purpose of this 7 of diamonds I'll address in a moment. Another point you'll notice is he began the trick with the deck faced up to manipulate our memory into believing we saw the switch deck faced up also, even though we didn't. The signed Queen of Clubs he pushed inside the deck genuinely was lost. This is simply because it doesn't matter at this point. You can see him losing the signed king in his Fool Us routine too. But he did need to control the 3 remaining queens, which he purposefully outjogged here, and then performed a diagonal bottom shift move. This move works by pushing the cards diagonally into the deck, grabbing the opposite corners and stripping them straight out. His hand movement here now makes sense after learning this move. However, the producers of Penn and Teller's Fool Us were highly deceptive. They completely trimmed out the portion where he performed this diagonal bottom shift move and jump cut to him performing the messy shuffle. The 3 queens currently are positioned under the 7 of diamonds. After which he lays out the cards in 4 separate packets, and the queens just so happen to be at the 5th position in each pile. Rewinding back to the moment he was holding the deck and started tossing them onto the table, he counts 4 cards from the top and, using the slip control, pushes one of the queens underneath the 4 cards in plain sight here, then places this first packet aside. This packet, containing the remaining 2 queens, is then placed right over here as he lays out the cards, making sure not to drop them on top of this packet. Then adds extra cards right underneath the first packet and not on top, to make sure the position of the first queen that is currently 5th from top doesn't change. After that, picks up the remaining 2 queens packet again, repeats the 4-card count from top and slips the queen underneath. Places this second setup packet back on the table, collects the remaining cards and places them on top. Currently this packet here contains only 1 queen and the 7 of diamonds. He picks up the packet again, positions the 3rd queen and the 7 of diamonds in the 5th position of the 3rd and 4th pile respectively. Since his Fool Us routine had a top viewing angle, you can see him clearly counting 4 cards from the top, and the 5th card can be seen slipped right underneath this packet.
I told you the script is so let's do them.
It's pretty obvious the number 5 was forced. Let's rewatch this clip again.
One say stop at any place here.
He's already holding 3 fingers up by the time he finishes asking them to call out stop, and by the time they respond he has all 5 fingers up. He didn't even pick up his other hand to show that he was going to count further and limited the count only to 1 hand. As we know already in the 4th packet, he revealed the 7 of diamonds at the 5th position instead of the signed queen, because he left finding the signed queen part as the finale. He doesn't necessarily have to use the 7 of diamonds, it just could be any card other than the queens that had to be face down, so that he could identify the trick was under control and the apparently incorrect card was correctly positioned 5th from top. For the finale, when it came to selecting any card, everything makes sense now because all the face down cards are the signed duplicate Queen of Clubs. So when he asked the female volunteer to touch any card, they genuinely could without hesitation. In his Fool Us act, he performed this exact phase as it is, to the point the 7 of diamonds was also used in the 4th packet reveal. And when Penn changed his mind last second to pick a different face-down card, it just made the impact of the finale look even more impossible.